How many pages have I written? The words, the endings. I've lost count. And still I remain trapped within this darkness. But this time, something is different. The answer lies just out of reach, enshrouded in black fog. I'm closing in now. I must be. The words move through me like blood through a vein. To escape, I must write. Though this new ending remains a mystery, I hold out hope that one day the fog will part. To illuminate my next chapter.
Swept from one dark place to another, best-selling author Alan Wake has seen things far stranger than fiction, though continuously faced with horror beyond his imagination. And that's saying something. Alan remains determined to escape this nightmare with his sanity intact. Alan Wake, best-selling author. 13 years ago, best-selling author Alan Wake disappeared from the town of Bright Falls under mysterious circumstances. While the outside world moved on, Alan was trapped in the dark place, a strange dimension where Alan's stories come to life. Sitting before his typewriter, Alan wrote page after page as time seemed to stand still outside the window of his cabin. He conjured terrors and demons from the darkest recesses of his mind in the hope of writing the one story that could lead to his escape from the dark place. Only then would Alan be able to return to the real world and reunite with his wife Alice. But escape never came, and after an eternity of writing, Alan lost all hope of ever returning to the life he once knew. And then he remembered something. One of the first scripts he wrote for the show Night Springs so many years ago, a tense supernatural thriller he called Dead of Night, about a group trapped in a nightmare world. The episode ended with them all escaping Alan struggled to remember. His time on Night Springs was ancient history, and the dark place was a thief of time and memories. The only solution was to recreate the script from memory, as many drafts as needed, until Alan remembered how the episode ended. With every iteration of the script, the dark place changed around Alan, placing him in the middle of the action, and every failed ending brought Alan back to the cabin and the typewriter. Undeterred, Alan tried again and again until the ending came to him like a voice whispering in his mind. Alan wrote the final draft and found himself back with his characters, standing before a wall of black fog. Looking at the fog sent chills up and down Alan's spine, but he knew this was how the episode ended. He watched his characters pass through the wall of fog, leaving the nightmare world behind. Alan stared down the wall, shocked by a realization. The episode had ended on an ambiguous note. Did the characters return home? Did they make it back to their loved ones? Alan couldn't remember what he had intended. He wanted to turn back, to start again, and write just one more draft. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than he saw it. A dim light flickering to life deep within the fog. A sign. A way home. After all this time, there it was, right in front of him. Alan took a deep, trembling breath and entered the fog, never taking his eyes off the light in the distance. Alan Wake, best-selling author, knows what it means to push back the darkness. His personal perks: Champion of Light, Boon Illumination, and Deadline. Make flashlights more powerful, reveal chests and generators, and create more frequent skill checks. Boon Illumination. Your keen insight is something best shared with others. Press and hold the active ability button on a dull or hex totem to bless it and create a boon totem. Soft chimes ring out in a radius of 24 meters. All survivors benefit from the following effects when inside the boon totem radius. The ores of all chests and generators are revealed to you in blue. Increase your action speed for blessing and cleansing by 10% while you have a lit boon totem. Survivors can only be affected by one instance of boon illumination at a time. Only one totem can be blessed by your boon perks at a time, and all of their effects are active on the same boon totem.
A shift in reality, heavy with hidden meanings.
Champion of Light. The glow of the flashlight looks a little different, feels a little warmer. Shining a flashlight applies the following effects. Grants a 50% haste status effect. Successfully blinding the killer by any means causes them to suffer from a 20% hinder status effect for 6 seconds. This effect cannot stack. Champion of Light has a cooldown of 60 seconds after blinding the killer.
I was terrified. I squeezed the flashlight like my life depended on it, willing it to stop coming any closer.
Deadline. Desperation creeps in, and you push yourself to work harder. Whenever you are in the injured state, Deadline activates. Increase the odds of triggering skill checks by 10% while repairing or healing. Causes skill checks to appear in random places. Reduces the penalty for missed skill checks by 50%.
The night had been one desperate situation after another.
Alan Wake, the best-selling author, is now trapped inside this realm of darkness and fog. It's like he never left the dark place. But what happened? He should be home now. Let's find out.
My throat is hoarse from screaming. I pace my writer's room back and forth. I know its measurements intimately. The typewriter stares at me from atop the writing desk. The blank page in the roller mocks me. I'd throw that thing through the window if I could. I squeeze the clicker in my hand. The thing that saved a whole town and trapped me in this dark place. How many pages have I written since then? How many hells have I endured to bring the one perfect story to life? The one story that would help me escape and return to Alice. I remember Alice walking into the study, placing a cup of coffee next to the typewriter, kissing me on the cheek, saying goodnight. Alice. The memory is like sand on the beach being devoured by the tide. With each ebb and flow of the waves of time, I lose more and more of my past. Alice walking through the door with a bottle of champagne to celebrate my first book deal. Her eyes so full of pride. Her eyes. What color were her eyes? When the waves take away my last few grains of sand, when there's nothing left to remember, what will be left of me? I grasp at the grains of sand I still have. Alice, my books, my apartment in New York City, my vacation to Bright Falls, and Night Springs. Yes, I was a young, scrappy writer when I was hired to work on Night Springs. One of my first episodes was about a heroic escape. I put my characters through such danger, their escape felt so triumphant. Get to the typewriter, get to work. This is the one. I just need to remember the story exactly as I wrote it so long ago. Then I'll be free. The clack of the keys is a familiar refrain. It brings comfort and torment in equal measure. I type the name of the episode upon the blank page. Dead of Night. The decaying city crumbles behind them as they run through the forest. Their exodus from the city was not easy. The fog closed in on them. They had to get out. They were pursued by the very thing they had summoned. Only 4 of them had made it out alive. But home was still so far away, across realms, in another dimension, and all they could do was run. Eloise grips Darren's arm, holding it tight around her shoulder. The dread had hurt him badly, and he'll bleed to death if they don't find a way home. Adrian urges the group onward, further into the forest. The trees grow thick around them, and Michelle yelps as a branch whips at her arm. The trees stand shoulder to shoulder, forcing the group down a single path through the forest. The ground quakes, and Eloise plants her feet. She's been carrying Darren for so long, and he is so heavy. Somewhere behind them, the dread bellows a hungry cry. It wants to feed on their misery, on their sorrow, on their souls. And it's getting closer. Alan Wake watches as his characters struggle for a way out. He can't see one. The trees stand shoulder to shoulder, flanking a path that ends in a wall of billowing fog, and the sight of it turns Alan's stomach. Keep them away from the fog. No matter what, keep them away from the fog. Adrian gasps and points in the direction they came. A twisting, writhing silhouette blocks what little light remains in the sky. They all watch helplessly as the dread approaches, getting closer and closer, until... I sit back in my chair looking at the words on the page. It's always been a pain in the neck to format a script on a typewriter. But there it is, my episode of Dead of Night, just as I saw it. I remembered every detail of the script perfectly. The strangers who found themselves in a dead city in a world of eternal night, the crumbling ruins, the dread emerging from the ground, the chase, the forest, the wall of fog. The thought of the fog sends a shiver through me. I could remember all of it, all except for the ending. I clench my fists and look down in my lap. The ending. The ending. My senses come to life as I think back on my days on Night Springs. I can smell the cigarettes smoldering in the ashtrays. I can hear the thick, phlegmy coughs of the veteran riders as they sat around the table pitching ideas. I could feel the weight in the pit of my stomach, the tremble in my hands. I was the youngest in that room by far, but I was hungrier than they were. I was eager, desperate to make my mark. I remember sitting in the showrunner's office enduring a round of notes, how it felt to not get the script perfectly right the first time. I remember I got notes about the ending. The ending. Did I struggle with the ending back then too? Is that why I'm struggling with it now? What I wouldn't give for something to read. Dog-eared, well-worn paperback. One that I would reread whenever I felt stuck. How often had I read that old thing? What was it called? I tried to conjure the image of the book in my mind. It has no cover, only images of... And at that moment, it all comes back to me. The decaying city crumbles behind them as they run through the forest. Darren cries out in pain and clutches the bleeding wound in his side as Eloise pulls him down the forest path. The ground quakes and Adrian loses his footing, stumbling into Michelle, knocking them both into the dust and dirt. Alan watches and waits. Eloise and Darren come up against the wall of fog at the end of the path. They had run from the fog in the city. They look around for some other way out. The trees stand shoulder to shoulder. Michelle crawls along the dirt trying to find her glasses. Instead, she finds something that makes her scream, first in fear, and then in delight. They all gather around and marvel at the discovery. A book bound in flesh, covered in ancient symbols of unknown origin. The dread's bellowing grows louder. Michelle flips through the book, squinting, trying to read the symbols. She has knowledge of the arcane. She knows the book can help them escape. She just has to find the right incantation and read it aloud, all without her glasses. Adrian gasps and points in the direction they came. A twisting, writhing silhouette blocks what little light remains in the sky. They all yell now, begging Michelle to read faster. Her fingers stop on a page. She doesn't know if it'll work, but she must try. She reads aloud the words, the language cutting through the air like rusty blades. As she speaks, a great blue orb appears around them, growing larger and larger until it explodes. And then, I did it. I remembered the ending of Dead of Night exactly as I had written it way back when. So why didn't it work? The script had ended with Michelle finding the book and reading the spell that sent them home. So why am I still here? Suddenly, I can smell cigarette smoke. And suddenly, I feel like a timid young writer again. The way the showrunner stubbed out his cigarette, the way he threw my script at me from across the desk. He called the ending a deus ex machina, said the book bound in flesh came out of nowhere. I hated the fact that he was right. He told me to try again, to make their escape mean something. I never felt so low as I did that day. So alone. Life before Alice was always so lonely. I remember the way Alice would sit next to me on the couch, listening. Not making suggestions, not soothing my ego, not stopping me from beating myself up about not being good enough to break through my writer's block. She would just sit there, with me, listening. I remember the way she would hold my hand. It was all she needed to do to calm me down, to slow down my racing heartbeat, ease the tightness in my chest, and open my mind to... I stopped dead in my tracks. Even now, Alice is helping me. I have the ending. I really have it this time. The decaying city crumbles behind them as they run through the forest. Eloise pulls Darren down the forest path, and he cries out, clutching the bleeding wound in his side. The ground quakes, and Adrian and Michelle stop each other from falling. They come to the end of the dark alley, and Alan quivers at the sight of the wall of black fog. The trees stand shoulder to shoulder. The dread bellows as it gets closer. Alan knows what he must do to finish the episode. It's the same ending that went on the air years ago. He had celebrated that night with his friends. Which friends? And he had felt 10 feet tall, an actual writing credit on Night Springs. Adrian gasps and points at the dread's twisting and writhing silhouette. They've tried to find any way out, but there is none. Except for the wall of fog. The showrunner had shaken my hand and flashed that crooked grin of his. It was the first time I really felt like a writer. Eloise takes Michelle's hand, and she takes Adrian's. Eloise helps Darren cross the threshold of the fog, and she follows. Then Michelle, then Adrian. They walk through the fog and vanish from sight. The end. Almost. The dread slithers down the path, bellowing louder than ever. Alan grits his teeth. He's running out of time, and he knows it. The wall of fog is calling to him now. Cold sweat beads on his forehead. This must have been how Eloise, Darren, Michelle, and Adrian felt. Trapped, with only one way out. But where would that way lead? One last memory about his time on Night Springs came clear as a bell. He made sure the script ended on an ambiguous note. Where did the ominous fog lead? The real world? Or something worse altogether? Alan stands before the fog, trying to peer through. He knows he must act quickly. The dread will be upon him at any moment. But I have to be sure. I need a sign. The single speck of light flickers so suddenly, so brightly through the fog that Alan almost starts at the sight of it. A light in the dark. The light had always been there for him ever since Alice went missing in Bright Falls. The light had been his guide, his savior. And here it is again. Alan reaches out to touch the fog. It's warm and inviting, like Alice's hand is warm in his. His racing heartbeat slows down. The tightness in his chest relaxes. "Come on," she says with a smile. "Let's go for a walk." And for a brief moment, she's there. Alan can feel her next to him as he crosses the wall of fog. He feels the sun on his face. A miracle in itself. Tears of joy well up inside. It's too much. And it slips away. Alan slips away. And fog turns to shadows.
Ugh.